Alright, I really want to get this story off my chest. I haven't mentioned it to anyone until recent, and no one seems to remember it actually happened. When I was around 10 years old, my parent took us for a walk in the forest every other week. I absolutely hated it since the forest was no fun at all to me. All there was to see were a bunch of trees, loads of leaves, and I guess I just didn't really care about it back then. The forest itself was small, but had a lot of different paths to walk. Some were rather small and had a lot of trees, others would be more open and walk you past farms and houses a bit more. There was, however, also a good bit of darker stories to the forest. The roads there were hardened back in the day, and rumors state that there were suspicions of multiple bodies being buried all over the forest, and despite the many hours they spent searching for them, they never found a trace of any of them. Since we used to walk there every other week, we knew pretty much all the routes. My mother came there a lot as a child growing up, usually going for walks with her grandparents. This was the main reason we were surprised we spotted a path we hadn't seen before. The path was different, it had a lot more trees and green, yet it was more light than the rest of the forest somehow, and it made me feel really happy to be there. There were tree trunks all across the route we had to climb over, among a lot of branches we had to squeeze past. Around halfway on the route I jumped off a trunk we had to climb over when I noticed something stuck in the ground. It was in pretty deep, but somehow it just got my attention, and I decided to dig it out. What I found was a hollow plastic toy, seemingly old, light brown in color, with absolutely no traces of paint on it, and shaped like a deer-like creature. The body was just like your average deer, exactly how one would imagine. The head and face, however, was where it got weird, as the ears were pretty far apart from each other and rather small compared to the rest of the features it had, and the eyes were absolutely huge, taking up about half the face of the creature, and it had a small triangle-shaped nose like a kid would draw it. Thinking back about it, it sure looked creepy. Anyhow, I showed the newfound toy to my parents, who immediately said it had to belong to a kid living somewhere near the path, so I decided to tuck it away to see if we would find any kids who would know anything about it along the way, while wondering if someone really had lost it, since we hadn't seen any houses since we ever went on the path. The rest of the walk went rather quick. We talked a bit, sat down for some food in the nature, and got back to the car when I realized I still had the toy. My parents told me to keep it if I wanted to, since the chance was really slim, we would still find whoever it belonged to. Looking back, I regret keeping the toy, as this is when it all started to get strange. I had always been prone to having nightmares of all different kinds. That night I laid down in bed with my new toy, yes, it was cleaned, and as I fell asleep I kept seeing the face of the toy at the most random places, on the walls, the ceiling, the closets, no matter where I looked I kept seeing it, getting more and more deformed over time. Eventually the eyes turned red, and it had these sharp and very pointy teeth. When I finally fell asleep, the actual nightmares started. I was back on the forest trail, but this time it was dark, and there were shadows everywhere between the trees, whispers to be heard in the distance. Suddenly something grabbed my leg and I woke up in shock, my leg still hurting, even though there was nothing to be seen about it, so I just shrugged it off and getting out of bed. This ritual repeated for 2 more nights, every time I would see the creature that the toy was based on, followed by another nightmare about the forest. The third one, however, was different, as in this nightmare I woke up with a certain sense of dread and got out of bed in an attempt to turn on the lights, which to my shock didn't work. I turned around to see the creature standing there, deformed, huge and growling softly. I rushed out of my room as soon as I could, while trying out every light switch passed on my way towards the stairs. I heard the creature once more before getting pounced, and feeling a sharp pain in my back my vision faded away. What felt like hours passed in which I couldn't hear or see anything, as I suddenly woke up in bed completely fine, the sun shining through the curtains, and I sighed with relief until I noticed. The lamps were on. Every single one. I tried to turn on and my nightmare was lit. This was when I decided I had to get rid of the toy. Whatever this thing was, whatever was attached to it was dark. I spent all day looking for it to get rid of it, but I never found it. The good part is that at least the nightmares stopped when it has been gone. Main reason I'm bringing this up, however, is because my parents moved out of that house, and I asked them if they actually happened to stumble upon it laying around somewhere. The answer was a strange one, as they do remember the walk in the forest, the actual path we took that day and never saw again after, but they said they never had seen me find the toy, nor seen the toy itself.